By the end of Hannah Okafor's first week as Director of Strategic Operations, Horizon Group no longer felt like the same place. Not because of a new policy, not because of a new project, but because of one unexpected promotion. The secretary who used to stand quietly outside the CEO's office now had an office of her own on the executive floor. And people couldn't stop talking about it. In the elevators, conversations would suddenly stop when Hannah stepped inside. Employees who once greeted her casually now looked unsure of what to say. Some smiled politely. Others simply avoided eye contact. Hannah noticed everything, but she kept her posture calm and professional. She had expected resistance. Change always made people uncomfortable. Still, the whispers grew louder with each passing day. On the 34th floor, inside one of the executive lounges, 3 senior directors sat around a glass table overlooking the city skyline. Director Choi leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "I still can't believe it," he muttered. Across from him, Director Han crossed his arms. "Believe what?" "That the CEO promoted his secretary straight into upper management." Han gave a small scoff. "That position took me 10 years to reach." Director Kim, the quietest of the 3, leaned forward slightly. "You don't think she actually earned it?" Choi laughed under his breath. "Earned it? Come on." Han tapped his finger against the table thoughtfully. "Maybe the CEO just trusts her." "Trust is one thing," Choi replied. "But this is power." Kim lowered his voice slightly. "You don't think there's something else going on between them?" The question hung in the air. None of them answered immediately, because the implication was obvious. In the corporate world, when someone rose too quickly, people always assumed there was a hidden reason. Finally, Han exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, "whether we like it or not, she's here now." Choi glanced toward the tall glass tower of the executive offices. "For now." Meanwhile, 2 floors above them, Hannah sat inside her new office reviewing operational reports. The room still felt unfamiliar. The desk was larger, the responsibilities heavier. But she refused to let the pressure show. Stacks of reports covered the table: department budgets, logistics timelines, partnership updates. She had already noticed several inefficiencies in the company's operations. Problems that had existed for years, but no one had taken the time to fix. Hannah picked up a pen and began making notes in the margins of a report. "If the logistics team coordinates directly with product development," she murmured to herself, "we could cut delays by 2 weeks." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." The door opened. Kong Junwoo stepped inside. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere of the room. He closed the door behind him and studied her quietly for a moment. "You've heard the rumors." Hannah didn't look surprised. She leaned back slightly in her chair. "It would be strange if there weren't any." Junwoo walked toward the window, looking out at the city below. "They're questioning your credibility." "That's expected. They're also questioning my judgment." Hannah allowed a faint smile. "That comes with being CEO." Junwoo turned back toward her. "You don't seem bothered." Hannah placed the report neatly on the table. "Rumors don't concern me." "Why not?" "Because rumors disappear when results appear." For the first time since entering the office, Junwoo's expression softened slightly. He crossed his arms. "You're confident?" "No," she replied calmly. "I'm prepared." Junwoo studied her carefully. The same quiet determination he had noticed years ago was still there. Except now, it carried authority. He nodded once. "Good." Hannah tilted her head slightly. "Why?" "Because the company is about to face a very complicated problem." She raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problem?" Junwoo walked toward the desk and placed a thick file in front of her. "A failing international partnership." Hannah opened the file. Inside were reports from multiple departments. Missed deadlines. Conflicting strategies. Financial losses. Her eyes moved quickly across the pages. "This is a mess." "Yes." "Who's responsible?" "Everyone," he said calmly. Hannah closed the folder and looked up. "And you want me to fix it?" "I want to see how you handle it." The challenge in his voice was clear. Outside the office walls, employees still whispered about her sudden promotion. Many believed she didn't belong there. But inside that room, Kang Junwoo wasn't questioning her ability. He was waiting to see it. Hannah stood slowly from her chair. Well, she said calmly, it seems the rumors are about to get their answer. Because in the next few days, the woman many executives underestimated was about to prove exactly why she belonged in that office. 3 days after Kang Junwoo handed Hannah the file about the failing partnership, the tension inside Horizon Group reached a boiling point. The project involved one of the company's most important international deals, a strategic partnership with Helios Technologies, a fast-growing European tech firm that had been expected to bring Horizon Group millions in global expansion opportunities. But now the deal was on the verge of collapse. Deadlines had been missed. Communication between departments had broken down. And Helios Technologies had already sent 2 warning letters demanding immediate answers. Inside the executive conference room, the atmosphere was heavy. Several department heads sat around the long glass table, their expressions tense. The logistics director flipped through a report in frustration. This delay wasn't our fault, he said sharply. Product development didn't deliver the software integration package on time. Across the table, the head of product development leaned forward. That's because your team changed the shipping schedule twice without informing us. Another executive joined the argument. And the marketing department launched the announcement campaign before the platform was even ready. The room erupted into overlapping accusations. Voices grew louder. Everyone had an explanation. Everyone had someone else to blame. At the head of the table, Kang Junwoo sat quietly, watching. Beside him, Hannah Okafor listened carefully to every argument. For several minutes, she said nothing. She simply observed. The frustration, the defensiveness, the lack of coordination. Finally, Junwoo leaned back slightly in his chair and spoke. Hannah. The room fell silent immediately. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. The room is yours. The weight of the moment settled instantly. This was her first real test as Director of Strategic Operations. If she failed, the rumors about her promotion would only grow louder. Hannah slowly stood. She walked toward the large digital screen mounted on the wall and connected her tablet. Within seconds, the project timeline appeared. A long chain of deadlines, deliverables, and department responsibilities. She pointed to the first section. This partnership was scheduled to launch its first joint product in 6 weeks. Several executives nodded. That timeline was ambitious, she continued calmly, but not impossible. She tapped the screen again. Red warning markers appeared across the timeline. But here's where things started going wrong. She highlighted the first issue. 2 months ago, logistics delayed the shipment of key hardware components by 9 days. The logistics director opened his mouth to protest. Hannah raised a hand gently. I'm not blaming your department, she said. She highlighted another point on the timeline. Because 3 days later, product development missed its integration deadline. The product director frowned slightly. And then, she continued, pointing to a third marker. Marketing launched the international campaign before either of those problems had been resolved. The screen now displayed a chain reaction of delays. For the first time since the meeting started, no one argued, because the pattern was obvious. Hannah turned back toward the table. The truth is simple. She spoke calmly, but firmly. This project didn't fail because of one department. She looked around the room. It failed because none of you were communicating. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She continued. Each department made decisions independently. No one coordinated the changes. Her voice remained steady. And when problems appeared, everyone focused on protecting their own department instead of solving the problem. The room grew very quiet. Even Kang Junwoo watched her with interest. Hannah tapped the screen again. The chaotic timeline disappeared. A new one appeared. Clear roles, clear communication channels, and a revised launch strategy. This is my proposal, she said. She walked slowly around the table as she explained. First, all departments involved in the partnership will report progress through a single coordination team. She pointed to the center of the chart. That team reports directly to strategic operations. Several executives glanced at each other, meaning her. Second, she continued, any changes to project deadlines must be approved across all departments before implementation. The logistics director nodded slowly. That would prevent sudden schedule shifts. Exactly, Hannah replied. Third, we inform Helios Technologies of the revised launch timeline today. She turned back toward the screen. With this structure, the project can still launch, only 4 weeks later than originally planned. The room remained silent. Finally, Director Hans spoke. You're suggesting we reorganize the entire leadership structure of this project? Yes. And you believe it will work? Hannah met his gaze calmly. I know it will work. Another executive leaned forward. Why are you so confident? Hannah allowed herself a small smile. Because I've spent 3 years watching how this company works. A few executives looked slightly embarrassed. I've seen what happens when departments don't communicate. She placed her tablet down. And I've also seen how quickly things improve when people work together. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Kang Junwoo finally broke the silence. Any objections? The room looked around cautiously. But none of the executives raised their hands. Director Kim leaned back slowly. Well, it's certainly more organized than what we've been doing. The logistics director nodded. And if it saves the partnership, I'm willing to try. One by one, the resistance faded. Hannah's strategy had done something unexpected. It hadn't just solved the problem. It had exposed the weaknesses in the company's internal structure. And everyone in that room knew it. As the meeting ended and executives began leaving, Director Choi quietly approached Director Han near the door. He glanced back toward Hannah, who was speaking with Junwoo near the screen. I underestimated her, he admitted. Han nodded slowly. So did I. Across the room, Kang Junwoo looked at Hannah with quiet satisfaction. You handled that well. Hannah exhaled softly. That was only the first battle. Junwoo allowed the faintest smile. Then Horizon Group is lucky to have you on the battlefield. Because what had just happened in that conference room wasn't just a successful meeting. It was the moment when the company's leadership began realizing something important. Hannah Okafor was no longer the quiet assistant they used to overlook. She was now one of the most powerful strategists in the building. And the rumors about her promotion were about to change into something else entirely. Respect. Late that night, the towering headquarters of Horizon Group stood almost completely silent. Most of the employees had already gone home hours earlier. The busy hallways that were normally filled with hurried footsteps and ringing phones were now quiet, lit only by the soft glow of overhead lights. But on the 34th floor, one office was still awake. Hannah Okafor sat behind her desk, staring at the screen of her laptop. The international partnership crisis had finally stabilized after the meeting earlier that day, but her work was far from finished. Dozens of reports still needed reviewing. 3 departments were waiting for updated coordination schedules. And tomorrow morning, she had another strategy meeting with the European partners. She rubbed her eyes gently and leaned back in her chair. Just one more report, she whispered to herself. The quiet hum of the building surrounded her. For the first time since becoming director of strategic operations, Hannah realized something strange. She wasn't exhausted. Not like she used to be when she worked as an assistant. Back then, her work had been endless tasks without control. Now, even though the responsibility was heavier, she had something she never had before. Authority. A voice. A chance to actually fix the problems she had spent years watching from the sidelines. She was just about to return to her laptop when she heard a soft knock on the door. Hannah looked up in surprise. Come in. The door opened slowly. Kang Junwoo stepped inside. In one hand, he held 2 cups of coffee. Hannah blinked in disbelief. You're still here? Junwoo closed the door behind him. So are you. He walked toward her desk and placed one of the coffee cups beside her laptop. You skipped dinner again. Hannah smiled faintly. You noticed. I notice more than people think. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Thank you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet of the nearly empty building made the moment feel strangely calm. Junwoo walked toward the window, looking out over the city of Seoul. Thousands of lights sparkled across the skyline like distant stars. Behind him, Hannah studied him carefully. It still felt strange seeing the CEO outside the intense environment of board meetings and corporate negotiations. Here, in the quiet of the evening, he seemed different. Less distant. More human. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. You trusted me today. Junwoo turned slightly. I hired you to do the job. But you could have taken control of that meeting. I could have. And you didn't. Junwoo took a slow sip of his coffee. If I had stepped in, the executives would have listened to me. He looked at her. But they needed to listen to you. Hannah considered that. You planned it that way. Yes. She shook her head slightly. You really enjoy throwing people into difficult situations. Junwoo allowed the faintest hint of a smile. It's the fastest way to see what someone is capable of. Hannah laughed softly. Well, next time warn me first. The room fell quiet again. After a moment, Hannah asked a question that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the day he appeared at her apartment. Why did you really come to my house that day? Junwoo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked back out at the glowing city lights. The question lingered between them longer than expected. Finally, he spoke. When you resigned, I thought it would be like any other resignation. Hannah waited, but when you walked out of the office, he paused. Something felt wrong. Hannah tilted her head slightly. Wrong how? Junwoo turned to face her again. The building felt different. Different. Empty. The word hung in the air. Hannah studied him carefully. That's a very dramatic reaction for losing an assistant. His gaze remained steady. You weren't just an assistant. She raised an eyebrow. 3 years ago, that's exactly what you hired me to be. Yes. Then what changed? Junwoo walked back toward the desk. You did. Hannah frowned slightly. What does that mean? He leaned lightly against the edge of the desk. For 3 years, you quietly held my entire schedule together. That was my job. You handled crises before they reached me. That was also my job. You understood how every department in the company worked. Hannah shrugged slightly. That happens when you listen carefully. Junwoo nodded once. Exactly. He met her eyes. Most executives only see their own department, but you saw the entire system. Hannah looked down at the desk for a moment. Then she asked softly, so when I resigned, you suddenly realized I was useful? Junwoo shook his head. No. He spoke more quietly now. I realized something much bigger. Hannah looked up again. What? For the first time since she had known him, Kang Junwoo seemed almost hesitant. I realized that the most important person in my company had just walked away. Hannah felt a small wave of emotion rise in her chest. She hadn't expected that answer. And that's why you drove across the city to my apartment. Yes. She studied his face carefully. You know most CEOs would have just hired another assistant. I know. So why didn't you? Junwoo's voice softened slightly. Because assistants can be replaced. Hannah waited. But people like you can't. The quiet sincerity in his voice made the room feel even stiller than before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the windows, the city continued moving as usual. But inside that office, something had shifted. Hannah finally smiled faintly. You know something, Mr. Kang? What? If you had said something like that 3 years ago, yes, I probably wouldn't have quit. Junwoo allowed a small smile. Then I'm glad you did. Hannah looked surprised. Why? Because if you hadn't walked away, he paused. I might never have realized how important you were. The two of them stood there quietly for a moment. The CEO of a billion-dollar company, and the woman who had once been his assistant. But now something had changed between them. The line between boss and employee had slowly begun to blur. And neither of them fully understood yet where it might lead. For the first few weeks after the board meeting, things at Horizon Group seemed to be moving in the right direction. The international partnership crisis had stabilized. Departments that once barely spoke to each other were finally coordinating through the structure Hannah had created. Even the executives who once doubted her had begun admitting, quietly, that her strategies were working. But success inside a powerful company rarely goes unnoticed. And it rarely goes unchallenged. One Monday morning, Hannah arrived at her office earlier than usual. The executive floor was still quiet, the large windows glowing with the soft light of sunrise over Seoul. She placed her bag on the desk and opened her laptop, ready to review the week's operational reports. But before she could begin, a notification appeared on her screen. Board communication. Urgent review. Hannah frowned slightly. Board communications rarely went directly to her inbox. Curious, she opened the message. As her eyes moved across the words, the calm expression on her face slowly disappeared. The message was short, formal, and deeply troubling. An anonymous complaint had been filed with the Horizon Group Board of Directors. The complaint questioned the legitimacy of her promotion. It accused Kang Jun-woo of bypassing corporate policy, and it suggested that her appointment as Director of Strategic Operations may have been influenced by personal favoritism rather than professional merit. At the bottom of the message was the board's response. An internal review of the appointment will begin immediately. Hannah leaned back slowly in her chair. So it begins, she murmured quietly. She had expected resistance, but she hadn't expected someone to escalate the situation to the board so quickly. A soft knock came at the door. Come in. The door opened, and Kang Jun-woo stepped inside. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He had clearly received the same message. You saw the notice. Hannah nodded calmly. Yes. Jun-woo walked toward the window, his expression unreadable. The complaint was submitted late last night. Anonymous? Yes. Hannah closed her laptop slowly. That means someone inside the company. Most likely. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The implication was obvious. Someone within the leadership of Horizon Group wanted her removed. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. This could damage the company. Jun-woo turned toward her. It won't. The board will investigate. They're allowed to. But public conflict between the CEO and the board could hurt investor confidence. Jun-woo's voice remained calm. I've dealt with worse. Hannah studied him carefully. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. That answer made her pause. You expected this? Yes. Hannah stood slowly. Then why didn't you warn me? Jun-woo met her gaze. Because if I had warned you, it might have made you hesitate. Hesitate about what? Taking the job. Hannah crossed her arms slightly. You knew someone might try to challenge my appointment. Yes. And you still offered me the position. Yes. She shook her head with a faint, incredulous smile. You really enjoy creating difficult situations. Jun-woo didn't react. This isn't about difficulty. Then what is it about? He stepped closer to the desk. It's about proving something. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Proving what? That Horizon Group rewards ability, not politics. She studied him carefully. And if the board decides the promotion was inappropriate? They won't. You sound very confident. I am. Hannah leaned lightly against the desk. You realize this investigation could damage your reputation too. Jun-woo's voice became firmer. I made the decision. Yes. And I stand by it. The room fell quiet again. For the first time since she had read the message, Hannah allowed herself to feel a small weight in her chest. This wasn't just office gossip anymore. This was a challenge from someone powerful enough to reach the board. Someone inside the company. An enemy she couldn't see. Hannah looked back at the message on her laptop. They'll ask questions, she said. Yes. They'll review my performance. Yes. They might even interview department heads. Jun-woo nodded. That's how these reviews work. She closed the laptop again. Well, she said calmly, that means we should give them something worth reviewing. Jun-woo watched her carefully. You're not worried. I didn't say that. But you're not backing down. Hannah met his gaze. If someone inside this company believes I don't belong here, her voice remained steady. Then they're about to learn exactly how wrong they are. For a brief moment, the tension in the room shifted. Because instead of fear, Jun-woo saw determination. He allowed a faint smile. Good. Hannah tilted her head. Why good? Because whoever filed that complaint is expecting you to panic. And you're confident I won't. Yes. She gave a small, confident smile in return. They clearly don't know me very well. Jun-woo nodded once. No. His voice carried quiet certainty. They don't. But somewhere inside Horizon Group's towering headquarters, the person who had filed that anonymous complaint was already watching, waiting, and preparing their next move. Because the fight for Hannah's position inside the company had only just begun. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. For 3 days, Tension hung over Horizon Group like a storm waiting to break. Executives whispered in the hallways. Department heads checked their emails more often than usual. Everyone knew something serious was happening at the top of the company. An internal investigation involving the CEO was rare. But an investigation questioning the promotion of one of the company's newest directors? That was unheard of. By 9 o'clock on Thursday morning, the boardroom on the 36th floor was already filled. 7 members of Horizon Group's board of directors sat around the long conference table. Each of them represented major investors who had helped build the company into the technology powerhouse it had become. They were not easily impressed, and they were even harder to convince. At the head of the table sat Chairman Lee, the oldest member of the board. His silver hair and calm expression reflected decades of corporate leadership. Beside him were the other directors, quietly reviewing documents placed in front of them. The door opened. Kang Junwoo entered the room. His posture was calm, his expression steady as always. But everyone in the room knew this meeting carried unusual stakes. "Good morning," he said. The board members nodded politely. Chairman Lee gestured toward the chair across from them. "Please, Mr. Kang. Sit." Junwoo took a seat. For a moment, the room remained silent. Finally, Chairman Lee folded his hands together. "I'm sure you understand why we've called this meeting." "Yes. You've received the complaint regarding Miss Hannah Okafor's promotion." "I have." Chairman Lee's voice remained neutral. "The board has a responsibility to ensure that all executive appointments follow proper corporate governance." Junwoo nodded once. "Of course." Another board member, Director Park, leaned forward slightly. "The complaint suggests that Miss Okafor's promotion from Executive Secretary to Director of Strategic Operations may have bypassed standard leadership evaluation procedures." Another director added bluntly. "In simpler terms, it appears unusually personal." The meaning was clear. The board wasn't just questioning the promotion. They were questioning the CEO's judgment. Junwoo remained perfectly calm. "If the board would like to review her performance, I've prepared documentation." He placed a thick report on the table and slid it toward Chairman Lee. Inside were detailed operational summaries from the past 4 weeks. The chairman opened the report slowly. The other board members leaned forward to examine the pages. Charts, performance metrics, financial projections, operational improvements. The silence in the room grew heavier as they read. After several minutes, Director Park looked up. "These numbers are recent?" "Yes." "Only from the past month?" "Yes." Another director flipped to a different section. "This shows a 22% improvement in project coordination efficiency." "Yes." A third director pointed at another chart. "And these revenue projections from the European partnership." He paused. "They were originally expected to drop." "They were," Junwoo confirmed, "but Miss Okafor reorganized the project structure." Chairman Lee slowly turned another page. "This operational model." He looked up. "She designed it?" "Yes." The room grew quiet again, because the report showed something impossible to ignore. In just 1 month, Hannah's leadership had improved communication between departments, stabilized a failing international partnership, and increased operational efficiency across multiple divisions. Finally, Chairman Lee closed the report. "These results are impressive." Another director nodded. "I must admit, this level of improvement in such a short time is unusual." Director Park leaned back thoughtfully. "It would appear Miss Okafor is highly capable." Junwoo said nothing. He didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. After a moment, Chairman Lee folded his hands again. "Mr. Kang." "Yes." "The board still believes the promotion process was unconventional." Junwoo nodded slightly. "I agree. But based on these results, it appears Miss Okafor has earned her position." Several directors nodded in agreement. The tension that had filled the room began to ease. Chairman Lee gave a small, thoughtful smile. "It seems Horizon Group gained a very valuable executive." Junwoo allowed a faint smile in return. "Yes." Chairman Lee leaned back in his chair. "In that case, the board sees no reason to continue the investigation." The decision was final. The complaint had failed. Hannah's position as Director of Strategic Operations was officially secure. But as the board members began gathering their papers, Director Park asked one final question. Do you know who submitted the complaint? Junwoo's expression remained calm.
No.
Chairman Lee nodded thoughtfully. Whoever it was, they may want to reconsider their strategy. Because the investigation had achieved the opposite of what they intended. Instead of weakening Hannah's position, it had strengthened it. Her performance had now been reviewed by the highest authority in the company, and the board itself had confirmed her value. Later that afternoon, inside her office, Hannah read the board's final report. Investigation concluded. No evidence of misconduct. Promotion stands. She leaned back slowly in her chair. The tension she hadn't realized she was carrying finally lifted. A knock came at the door. Come in. Kong Junwoo stepped inside. Well, he asked. Hannah turned the report toward him. I suppose the board approves. Junwoo glanced at the document. They always follow the numbers. Hannah studied him carefully. You knew this would happen. I hoped. She shook her head slightly with a soft laugh. You're a very confident man, Mr. Kong. He shrugged lightly. I trust capable people. Hannah stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the city moved as usual, unaware of the corporate battle that had just ended. But someone inside this company tried to remove me, she said quietly. Yes. And we still don't know who. Junwoo crossed his arms thoughtfully. Not yet. Hannah turned back toward him. You think they'll try again? His answer came without hesitation. Yes. She smiled slightly. Good. That answer surprised him. Why good? Because now they know something. What? Hannah placed the report back on her desk. That I'm not leaving. And somewhere inside the vast headquarters of Horizon Group, the person who had tried to destroy her reputation was already realizing something else. They had just made a very powerful enemy. The celebration across Horizon Group didn't last long. For most employees, the conclusion of the board investigation meant one thing. Business could return to normal. But for Hannah Okafor, the day had been emotionally exhausting. The pressure of being evaluated by the board of directors, the quiet fear that her promotion could be taken away, and the realization that someone inside the company was secretly working against her. All of it weighed heavily on her mind. That evening, long after most employees had gone home, Hannah stepped onto the rooftop terrace of the Horizon Group building. It was one of the few quiet places in the entire headquarters. From there, she could see the entire city of Seoul stretching endlessly into the distance. The cool evening air brushed gently against her face as she leaned lightly against the railing. The city lights glittered below like thousands of tiny stars. Moments like this were rare. Moments when the constant noise of meetings, deadlines, and responsibilities faded away. For a few minutes, she allowed herself to breathe. But she had a feeling she wouldn't be alone for long. Behind her, the glass door opened softly. She didn't turn around. Instead, she smiled faintly. You always find me when I hide. The footsteps approaching her slowed slightly. You're not very good at hiding. Hannah chuckled quietly. I suppose I should find better hiding places. Kong Junwoo stepped beside her at the railing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there together, looking out at the glowing city below. Finally, Junwoo broke the silence. You handled the board well today. Hannah folded her arms lightly against the railing. I had help. You handled it yourself. She glanced sideways at him. You gave them the report. Yes. And those performance numbers saved me. Junwoo shook his head. No. Hannah raised an eyebrow. No. You created those results. The quiet sincerity in his voice made her pause. For a moment, she simply watched the traffic moving far below the building. You know, she said softly, when I first started working here, I never imagined I'd end up standing on this rooftop with the CEO. Junwoo gave a faint smile. Life is unpredictable. That's one way to describe it. Another comfortable silence settled between them. Then Hannah asked quietly, Do you ever regret it? Junwoo looked at her. Regret what? Promoting me. The question hung in the cool night air. Junwoo didn't hesitate. No. Hannah studied his face carefully. Even after the board investigation? Yes. Even though someone inside the company is trying to remove me? Yes. His voice carried calm certainty. Hannah exhaled slowly. You're either very brave or very stubborn. Probably both. She laughed softly. The sound echoed lightly across the quiet rooftop. Then her expression grew more thoughtful. Working here changed my life. Junwoo glanced at her.
How?
For 3 years, I watched how powerful decisions were made. She rested her hands on the railing. I saw brilliant strategies and terrible mistakes. And now I'm part of those decisions. Junwoo nodded. You earned that position. Hannah tilted her head slightly. You really believe that, don't you? Yes. She turned to face him fully now.
Why?
Junwoo hesitated. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because the truth was more complicated than he usually allowed himself to admit. Finally, he spoke quietly. Working with you changed me. The words caught Hannah by surprise. Changed you? Yes.
How?
Junwoo looked out at the city again. For years, I believed the most important thing in business was efficiency. That's not unusual for a CEO.
No.
But efficiency can make people forget something important. Hannah waited. The people behind the work. She studied him carefully. You're saying I reminded you of that? Yes. She smiled faintly. That's quite a compliment. It's the truth. The air between them felt different now. More personal. Less formal. Finally, Hannah asked a question she hadn't expected to ask. Why did you really come to my house that night? Junwoo looked at her again. I already told you. You said the building felt empty. That was part of it. And the rest. For the first time in the entire conversation, Kang Junwoo seemed slightly unsure. The man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation suddenly struggled to find the right words. Hannah watched him carefully. You're hesitating. Yes. That's unusual. I know. The silence stretched between them. Then finally, he said something that neither of them had expected to hear. I didn't want to lose you. The words were simple, but their meaning was far more complicated than they sounded. Hannah felt her heartbeat quicken slightly. Lose me? Yes. You barely spoke to me for 3 years. I know. And suddenly you didn't want to lose me? Junwoo nodded. Yes. Hannah looked away for a moment, trying to process the weight behind his words. You know something, Mr. Kang? What? That sounds dangerously close to a confession. He met her gaze again. Maybe it is. The night air suddenly felt cooler, because somewhere in the quiet space between them, something new had begun to grow. Something neither of them had planned. And something that could become very complicated inside the walls of Horizon Group. 2 days after the rooftop conversation, Horizon Group returned to its usual rhythm. Meetings filled the executive floor again. Department heads rushed through the hallways with reports and deadlines. The company had survived the board investigation, and most employees believed the conflict was over. But Hannah Okafor knew better. Somewhere inside the company, someone had tried to destroy her reputation. And people who made moves like that rarely stopped after their first failure. Late Friday afternoon, Hannah sat in her office reviewing financial reports when a soft knock came at the door. Come in. The door opened and Daniel Cho, one of the senior analysts from the corporate strategy team, stepped inside. Daniel was known throughout the company as quiet and meticulous. He rarely spoke during meetings unless he had something important to say. But today, his expression looked unusually tense. Hannah, do you have a minute? Of course. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. Sit. Daniel closed the door behind him before sitting down. That small action immediately caught her attention. Most employees didn't close the office door unless the conversation was serious. You look worried, Hannah said. Daniel hesitated. There's something you should probably know. Hannah leaned back slightly in her chair. Go on. He lowered his voice. The complaint that went to the board. Yes. I think I know who submitted it. The room suddenly felt quieter. Hannah didn't react immediately. Instead, she folded her hands calmly on the desk. That's a serious accusation, Daniel. I know. Do you have proof? Not official proof. Then what do you have? Daniel leaned forward slightly. Patterns. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Explain. For the past few weeks, I've been reviewing internal communication records related to the European partnership crisis. That's part of your job. Yes. But while I was reviewing the emails, I noticed something unusual. Hannah waited patiently. Someone in senior leadership has been quietly pushing a narrative that your promotion was reckless. Her expression remained calm. That's not exactly surprising. No, Daniel admitted. But the person spreading that narrative also had access to the board communication channel. Now Hannah's attention sharpened.
Who?
Daniel glanced briefly at the closed door before answering. Vice Chairman Park. The name hung heavily in the air. Vice Chairman Park was one of the most powerful figures in Horizon Group. He had been part of the company long before Kang Junwoo became CEO. Many of the older board members trusted him deeply. And more importantly, he had the authority to communicate directly with the board. Hannah leaned back slowly. That's a very serious claim. I know. Why tell me? Daniel hesitated before answering. Because I've worked at this company for 10 years. And I've seen how Vice Chairman Park operates. Hannah studied him carefully. What do you mean? Daniel lowered his voice even further. He doesn't like losing influence. And my promotion threatened that influence. Yes. Hannah crossed her arms thoughtfully. Because I report directly to the CEO. Exactly. And I reorganized several departments that used to report through his office. Daniel nodded. You shifted the power structure. The realization settled slowly into place. This wasn't just personal jealousy. It was corporate politics. Hannah stood and walked toward the large window behind her desk. The city stretched far into the distance beneath the afternoon sun. So, Vice Chairman Park tried to remove me by questioning the promotion. Daniel nodded. That's my theory. Hannah turned back toward him. Does the CEO know? I'm not sure. Did you tell him?
No.
Why not? Daniel gave a small, nervous smile. Because accusing the vice chairman without proof could destroy my career. Hannah considered that. He wasn't wrong. Vice Chairman Park had been part of the company's leadership for decades. If Daniel was wrong, the consequences would be severe. But if he was right, then the situation was far more dangerous than she had imagined. Hannah walked back to the desk and sat down again. Thank you for telling me. Daniel nodded slightly. I just thought you deserved to know. She gave a small smile. You're braver than you think. I'm not brave. Then why risk telling me? Daniel stood up slowly. Because you're the first executive I've seen in years who's actually trying to improve this company. That answer surprised her slightly. He walked toward the door. But you should be careful. Hannah tilted her head. Careful. If Vice Chairman Park really is behind this. Daniel paused before opening the door. Then the complaint to the board was probably just the beginning. The door closed quietly behind him. Hannah sat silently in her office for several minutes, thinking. If Daniel's theory was correct, then the problem wasn't just a hidden enemy. It was a powerful one. Someone who had been part of the company's leadership long before she arrived. Someone who likely believed she didn't belong. And someone who might be planning his next move. That evening, when Kang Junwoo stepped into her office, he immediately noticed the thoughtful expression on her face. Something's on your mind. Hannah looked up at him. Yes. What happened? She leaned back in her chair. I think we finally know who tried to remove me. Junwoo's expression didn't change. Who? Hannah met his gaze. Vice Chairman Park. For the first time since she had known him, the calm expression on Kang Junwoo's face hardened slightly. Because if that name was true, then the quiet conflict inside Horizon Group was about to become a very serious war.